Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa Golob and I'm here with my co-host Scott Hayward. And this week we have a very special guest. Mr. Andrew Lawton joins us on the podcast today. Thank you guys for coming on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was just waiting for Andrew to say thank you.
I was waiting for Scott to jump in.
You know, we're going to keep this in because that's funny.
You wouldn't know that I'm actually a professional broadcaster. Thank you very much for having me.
For those of you who don't know, which would be very few, Andrew Lawton is a broadcaster. He's a columnist at True North. He has a Substack called Andrew Lawton. He was formerly a radio talk show host for 5 years, and he wrote a national column for the Global News. He's been featured and published across the world and even ran as a PC candidate under Doug Ford in Ontario's 2018 provincial election. And most notably, he recently wrote a book entitled The Freedom Convoy, the inside story of 3 weeks that shook the world. But personally, for me, what I love about Andrew the most is that he may have been the content of the very last video that Norm Macdonald ever made, which is crazy. And
that
sad,
is an
but
impressive
crazy.
resume right there.
Yeah. Did you knew that, Andrew, right? Like you've heard that before?
Well, so it wasn't actually the last video he ever did. There was this like weird West African clickbait mill that said it was, and I didn't correct it, I will say. I shamefully let the rumor fly out for a little while.
Okay. I wonder, yeah, because I know he did do, we could talk about Norm Macdonald later, but I know he did do like a comedy special that never actually went to like a comedy club. He just did it like in front of his laptop, and potentially that was the last thing. But yours is one of the last.
Yeah. Mine was a couple of years old though. It just it recirculated right after his passing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was still good. I'll still claim credit for it.
Yeah, we'll include it in the links because it is really funny for any Norm Macdonald fans. Today's podcast was sponsored by Larosse Media, so check them out. They do videos and documentaries, all sorts of media work, so please check them out at larossemedia.com. And, you know, to me, when I first moved to Alberta, I was really pumped for the talk radio out here because I listened to talk radio. I lived off it in the GTA. Whenever I traveled around to different meetings or events, I would always listen to it. It sucked. It was very infuriating. I came to Alberta. I was really pumped, thought the talk radio was going to be super conservative, really great. It sucked even more, except the only saving grace was your show, or when you filled in. And then you got suspended, and then I guess you got canceled, really, before cancel culture. But we can also talk about that a little bit later. But just so you know, you were really you really helped me ease into the Alberta politics side of it when I first moved here. So thank you for that.
No, thank you for listening. Yeah, I always loved it. It was funny. I was actually like an imposter because I've always had a Western sensibility, but I'm not actually an Albertan. But when I was hosting out in Alberta, I had all these Albertans that like thought I was in downtown Calgary when I was actually like doing it from London, Ontario. And then they felt so heartbroken when they learned the truth. But I think they've come back around. So I'm glad to help you ease into that life from Ontario.
So are you from London, Ontario? Is that where you were born and raised, or did you just move there throughout your young adult life? Or tell us where you came from.
I was born in Trenton, Ontario, actually. My dad was in the military, so I was born there, but I moved to London at a very young age. And I've lived in Ottawa for a bit when I worked on Parliament Hill, but I've ended up back in London, and it's been a very good home to me and my family, especially with COVID, where wouldn't trade in the size of the house and the land you get at all for what you'd have to deal with in a big city in the world of lockdown. So.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't born in Sarnia, but I was raised in Sarnia, so just a little bit down the road, and I totally understand. We had you could get so much more housing for your value there than in Calgary, and especially in Toronto. So, yeah, I mean, let's just dive right in because the Freedom Convoy was very pertinent in the last year or so. Particularly, I don't know, Scott, if you knew many people who went down, but just so you know, Andrew, my mom and my brother, my oldest brother specifically, went down every single weekend, and my brother specifically, he's 5 years younger than me, so he's 30, and he was never super political, but this just invigorated him like nothing else. He's a small business owner in Sarnia, took over my dad's flooring business. And, this was just such a monumental issue for them, specifically in that regard. And so they did the trek from Sarnia to Ottawa every single weekend just to support. And they would send me videos, and I had some serious FOMO. But I guess my first question is, when and why did you decide to write this book in the first place?
I decided to write it shortly after the convoy was wrapped up in Ottawa. After the Emergencies Act came in, the police moved in. And I would say, though, that the why is a bit more interesting. There was actually a mutual friend of ours, Jonathan Van Maren, that I had been talking to, saying, someone's got to write a book about this. Someone's got to write a book, because I saw when I was there and talking to organizers that there was so much that was being missed. And I don't just mean by media bias that wasn't really covering it honestly or fairly, but by things that were happening that you couldn't really see unless you knew some of the players and had gone behind the scenes, like the structure and logistics and this operational side of things. And at a certain point, Jonathan said very politely, just shut up and write it yourself. That wasn't his exact wording, but that was how I took it. And I said, you know what, you're right. So I buckled down and I did it. And it was a very quick process compared to what writing a book normally is for people. I wrote the whole thing in about 5 weeks. And during that time was also doing interviews with key players and organizers and volunteers. But I really felt it was important to answer some of the questions that convoy supporters and also convoy detractors had about what this thing really was.
Yeah, I'm curious. So you went up to Ottawa toward the end of the convoy, correct? I can't remember if you were there.
I went up twice. I went up at the beginning and what ended up being the end.
Right, because we didn't exactly know, when it would end. I remember texting with you when you were up there. I think you were there in front of the hotel when the whole horse incident happened and things like that. I think you got hit with a little bit of pepper spray yourself. You got the
That's fake news. It wasn't a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry. So sorry. Yeah. But I guess kind of my question is to you, like, having been up there, especially at the end when it was all wrapping up, and you were saying that, there may or may not have been some media bias. Did you come across, or have you come across any journalists who are out there, any reporters that would be considered from the legacy media, from the mainstream media, that you felt were at least trying to do a good job and trying to cover and cover it fairly and kind of really delve down and get into those stories? Or do you think that was just something that was completely looked over, washed over, just a big hole? Kind of what was your experience with some of your colleagues in the media? I guess not just in legacy media, but in independent media as well.
Yeah, there certainly were. I mean, I found the Radio Canada reporters, a lot of the French language reporters actually were doing a lot of really good work there. And I mean, it wasn't making it into the English language coverage, but I was seeing them on the streets talking to real people. And two in particular from English media that I thought did a fairly admirable job were Evan Solomon of CTV and Sean O'Shea from Global News. And those were the two. And I didn't actually see Sean personally, but I was following along with his coverage. And he was spending a lot of time on the streets talking to people, posting these raw exchanges with these people, good, bad, and neutral, that he was having these conversations. And Evan Solomon, I did see a number of times. He was doing a lot of work, actually not just in the studio, but on the streets, talking to people, interviewing them, asking what they were there for. And what was great about Evan Solomon's reporting is that, not even his reporting, just his approach, is that he would stand there and take the abuse from people. Mm-hmm. When people wanted to scream at him and call him fake news, he would actually sit there and take them and hear them out and then actually have a conversation. And that was really refreshing because there were a lot of people that I felt behaved in a very, very uncomfortably wrong way with mainstream media reporters that they saw. And I understand the anger, but I don't excuse the decorum and the behavior. And I feel you need more people that we're going to have these conversations and work past the tension to have a real dialogue. And those were the two that I saw doing that. There may have been others, but they're the ones that I saw.
What was the most surprising thing that you found going up to the convoy and talking to people, whether good or bad? Like, what was the thing that kind of smashed your expectations of when you were driving up to Ottawa, and then when you actually got there talking to people on the ground?
I think the diversity among the people in the convoy, supporting the convoy, was the biggest shocker, because I knew that the mainstream media malignment of them as the white supremacists was not valid. But I still couldn't quite appreciate who these people were without being there. And one notable example of this is that there was a disproportionately high number of Indigenous people there from various Indigenous communities across Canada. And they were, I think, out of place in a lot of people's minds. What I mean is what people would perceive,
Right.
because you don't normally see Indigenous people in, conservative political protests or loosely conservative political protests. There were Quebec separatists and Alberta separatists that were there that were more united than divided in the fight against vaccine mandates and big government. And there were a lot of these little things where people that didn't fit the mold that the media was saying the convoy was, that were there. And that part I didn't feel was accurately conveyed in coverage.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how this sort of has affected the political landscape in Canada, because it has in more ways than one, both provincially and federally. But let's just start with provincially. You see Jason Kenney here in Alberta. He didn't necessarily lose his leadership review, but he didn't get enough support to retain it. In his mind, Scott Moe retained his leadership. Brian Pallister lost his. Ford retained his. So why do you think the discrepancy, and what do you think is behind that, if it is in fact the mandates and COVID restrictions?
I think there are a few things, and I think that a lot of the time when we're discussing the legacy of the convoy, just to look at that for a moment, it's easy to overstate or understate, depending on your bias, its effect on the political landscape. I mean, Aaron O'Toole's ousting, I don't think you can say was 100% the product of the convoy, but I certainly think the convoy gave the time and place to justify pulling the trigger on a leadership that had a lot of challenges to it. Jason Kenney as well. I mean, he's been fairly dismissive, I think, of criticism against him, as though it's all just the COVID stuff. He says, yeah, it's all just people that don't like what happened to the pastors and the lockdowns and the vaccine passports. But there were other issues that predated these things that had to do with Western independence, that had to do with general leadership. So I think that the convoy really exacerbated existing challenges in cases where they were there. And I'm not really sure that happened with Scott Moe. I don't really think Scott Moe was facing much in the way of internal dissent in his caucus or in his party in a way that Jason Kenney was, in a way that that Aaron O'Toole was.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, the exacerbation of things that were already pre-existing, because I think, if you look at, for example, Aaron O'Toole's leadership, right? It's a very short leadership in terms of being leader of a federal political party, especially being leader for Majesty's loyal opposition. And he came in to be leader not even 2 years ago yet, right? It was at the end of August of 2020. And within a year and a half later, not even, he was already gone. And this is why we have the current leadership race that is right now. I guess I kind of like a follow-up to Alissa a little bit. I think that's a good point that you made, that depending on your bias, you could say that the convoy had, you can either overstate or understate its effects on politics in Canada, particularly within internal politics within various conservative parties, federally and provincially. I guess my follow-up is, what do you see as I don't know long term, but let's use long term in relation to about a year or so. The convoy more or less ended in February. What do you see being the longer term effects of that convoy, both in federal and provincial conservative politics? Or do you think that it has no effect whatsoever, and that the effects that it already has have passed at this point?
So it's made federal politics anyway. It's made federal politics more responsive to this growing sentiment throughout the pandemic that we saw as being, I think, primarily responsible for the PPC's significant uptick in voting share in the 2021 election. Just remember, Aaron O'Toole was tacitly against vaccine mandates, but didn't really want to talk about it, and would pivot anytime he did say he was against vaccine mandates to talk about how everyone needs to get vaccinated and how great vaccination was. And that was really rubbing a lot of people that were very critical of vaccine mandates the wrong way. So Aaron O'Toole was not a champion on this issue at all. and Maxime Bernier was. And now you fast forward, you have an interim leader in Candice Bergen, who was a supporter of the convoy quite early on, and was actually, and I think is actually, a supporter of this broader freedom movement against vaccine mandates, against these COVID restrictions, and the conservative leadership race. If you look at the candidates that are in the running, Roman Baber, Leslyn Lewis, Pierre Poilievre, most of those, that group, have been arguing about who was a bigger supporter of the convoy and who was a better supporter of the convoy and who was there earlier. So I think that the Conservative Party has very much become more responsive to this contingent in Canada, which wouldn't have happened without the convoy creating and expanding that base of support. Now, in provincial politics, that hasn't really been as much an issue. I think victory is, in a way, it does a lot. Because Doug Ford had a majority government. He has another majority government. The fact that he's kicked people out of his caucus like Roman Baber and like Randy Hillier has not really changed anything in Ontario politics. We saw Jim Karahalios and Derek Sloan have their upstart parties, but that didn't really make a dent in the way that we've seen at the federal level. So I don't think it has dramatically uprooted everything, but I do think it's made an impact.
Do you see going forward, because we don't know when the next federal election is, right? We know when these next provincial elections are going to be, and after Quebec, I believe the next closest one is going to be in Alberta, has to happen on or before May 29th, 2023, so just a little less than a year from now. But keeping our focus federally for now, because I think you're right, that's where most of the change, at least internally within Conservative parties, has occurred. Do you see the next election, whether it be next year or 2024 or maybe all the way to 2025, that the Conservative Party of Canada being more responsive to this freedom movement, being a bit of a death knell for the PPC? I mean, in the quarterly numbers for fundraising just came out. And for the second quarter of 2022, which ended on June 30th, I think the PPC saw their contributions, their income decreased by almost half, by almost 50%. So do you see this as basically more or less a, if not official, like kind of by de facto reabsorption of the PPC back into the Conservatives? Or do you think that the effect that we're feeling right now by 2024, 2025 has the potentiality of kind of dissipating, and then you'll still have that 5% go to the PPC in the next election? I mean, it is kind of an unfair question for you to ask, to look into a crystal ball that far ahead. I mean, a week is forever in politics, but I am curious as to kind of what you think, because you were on the ground there and you have been in connection to a lot of these people who are, millions and millions of Canadians.
Yeah, I think that there is a big divide, not a big divide, but there's a divide between the PPC leadership and officialdom and the PPC voters and PPC supporters. And I think that, Maxime Bernier and the people in charge of the PPC and most of the candidates are committed. They have made their decision that there is nothing the Conservative Party could do to bring them back in. And you might see one or two that say, yeah, things have changed, I'm coming back in. But they're about their own survival and existence as a party now, which is its prerogative as a political party. I think a lot of people that voted PPC did see their vote as a vote against Aaron O'Toole or a vote against Andrew Scheer. And with the right leader, they would return to the Conservative Party of Canada. And the number of people I've heard from anecdotally that have said, I'm voting for Pierre Poilievre. If he's the leader, I'll vote for the Conservatives. Otherwise, I'm voting PPC. So Pierre Poilievre is very much tapping into a group of people that voted PPC, but are not completely anti-conservative voters if the right circumstances are there. And I think that that's going to be the big challenge. I mean, the PPC did attract a broader coalition of support in 2021 because the vaccine mandate issue was entirely theirs. No other party was taking a stand on this. And speaking to these people who were former Conservatives, former NDPers, former Greens, former non-voters, but I don't know how much of that support will last if in 2025 these things are a distant memory.
So, you've interviewed each of the leadership candidates and you've spoken to them in depthly on a variety of issues. Obviously, from the very beginning, we've seen a front runner in Pierre Poilievre. He has, like you said, embraced this kind of freedom with regards to vaccine mandates. However, there were earlier, things going around where he said on a radio show that like it's very minimal and okay if we just wear a piece of cloth over our mask. Like he doesn't really care about that. And then in an email to a supporter, it was that she was asking about vaccine mandates, and he just said like the official policy of the Conservative Party is to get vaccinated. So he sort of started to embrace this more with regards to the leadership race. Do you think that was politically strategic for him to do that? Do you think his, he's capitalizing on that? And do you think that the leadership race would have changed if there wasn't COVID or the Freedom Convoy or mandates or anything like that?
Well, that's the question. And I mean, if ever you have a politician that has said two different things in the span of, however long a period of time, there's the question of which one is real, which one is not real. I mean, my general view in some cases is that probably neither is real. You could look at Aaron O'Toole's pivot from true blue conservative to whatever he was in the federal election, and Andrew Scheer as well. I mean, the way he ran in the leadership to the way he ran in the general. I think the most charitable interpretation is that a lot of conservative members of parliament were really shackled under the old guard, under the leadership of Aaron O'Toole. The number of MPs like Pierre Poilievre and Scott Aitchison and Leslyn Lewis who ran on a carbon tax by virtue of running for the Conservatives in 2021 and are now against the carbon tax. That's just one example of it. So, you want to hope that the leadership race versions of these candidates you get are going to be the authentic ones. But I think all of these are very legitimate questions.
Time to take a quick break. More with Andrew Lawton, and we'll be right back.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larossemedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada, from coast to coast to coast.
And we're back, and we're here with Andrew Lawton from the True North Center. Once again, Andrew, thanks for joining us. And we were talking about your book, about the Freedom Convoy, and how that has, I don't know about necessarily reshaped, but definitely perhaps relaunched conservative politics within Canada, both federally and provincially. And we were talking just before the break here about the federal leadership race. And if that's all right, we'll just stay on this topic for a little bit longer. But I suppose, like Alissa mentioned, you were speaking with all the leadership candidates. You did, I think, at least excellent interviews with all of them. This is, the third leadership race within the Conservative Party of Canada in the last 5 years. Between you, Alissa, and myself, this is something that, and millions of Conservatives across the country, this is something that we've been involved with for the third time now in 5 years. I suppose, my question to you is, what have you noticed that has been different in this leadership race compared to the previous two that we just had? And do you think that that's going to provide the party, let's say, with a more permanent result, maybe a more long-lasting result than we've seen for the last two leadership races?
So I think, the 2017 leadership race was fascinating because you had, I think at one point it was about 114 candidates that were running and all of them had been a cabinet minister under Stephen Harper, some representing portfolios you had never heard of before. But I think when you come after 10 years in government, you have a pool of talent that is significantly different than it is now. So
Mhm.
the idea of the outsider in 2017, I mean, Kevin O'Leary, but ultimately speaking, your pick was between this cabinet minister and this cabinet minister and this cabinet minister and this House Speaker. And it was that House Speaker, Andrew Scheer, that won. And you compare that to 2020 when it was far more austere. You had, the guy who had been the cabinet minister under Harper. You had the other guy that had been the cabinet minister under Harper. And then you had two people that were relative unknowns. And one of them has become quite I'd say a mainstay in conservative politics, and that's Leslyn Lewis. This time around is somewhere in between. I mean, you've got a little bit more of a diverse coalition, but you still have that. It's still very much clear this is a party that has not been in government for the last three elections. And I think there's a lot more soul searching about the future of conservatism than there was in 2020 and then there was in 2017. And I think a big part of that is because you have Jean Charest, whose only pitch, really, and I think he would probably acknowledge this, is electability. It's not that I'm the most conservative candidate in the room. It's that I'm the only one that can win. Your options are Justin Trudeau or me, and that's that. And then you have Pierre Poilievre, who is really trying to, as Alissa was talking about earlier, speak to this message of freedom, which he thinks clearly is a unifying message that can unite the red Tories, the blue Tories, the social conservatives, the libertarians, and so on. And then you've got under that other people that are trying to carve out their own space. I mean, Roman Baber has tried to be the guy that's going to restore democracy in conservative politics. Leslyn Lewis has spoken about, I think, a lot of the problems that we're seeing in this country that are bigger than this leadership race, about the erasure of certain types of conservatives who don't fit the mold of what the media likes to typecast conservatives as. And Scott Aitchison, who's, I think, gunning for Mr. Congeniality in a lot of ways. So I think that we have a lot more diversity in this race than we had in 2020, but not as much as in 2017.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people perceive Pierre Poilievre and the people that are on his team as being kind of that maverick outsider. In reality, very much the establishment type of candidate. It's kind of hard for me to kind of go back in conservative politics, certainly in this country, for the last kind of 20, 30 years, and to think of, okay, has there been another establishment candidate in reality that has been perceived as someone as being an outsider? There's a lot of Harper era people around Pierre's team. Some people would say that's really great. Some people would rather, to move on. At this point right now, it does look like that Pierre was likely to win the leadership race. Should he win the leadership race, how do you think he will act as leader? Not so much in terms of policy, but maybe in terms of personnel. Like, do you think there will be a big change in the office of leader of the opposition? Do you think there'll be a big change in the people who are in party headquarters? And if there is a change, do you think it's a new change and fairly new, fresh blood? Or do you think it's going to be a lot of Harper era people kind of from around that 2011 to 2015 last majority government that they had that will kind of come back for another kick at the can?
I think people forget that the average age of a political staffer is quite young. I mean, there was a when I interviewed Stephen Harper, I shouldn't even tell this story, but you get something I've never said before. When I interviewed Stephen Harper during the 2015 campaign, it was in the studio that I did my radio show from. And when the RCMP officers were there to do the advance early on, they were waiting for the staffers, and the staffers were running late, the advance staffers on the campaign. And one of the RCMP officers in the Prime Minister's protective detail had said, we can't go through yet. We're waiting for the kids who run the country. And it was like a remarkably candid remark about how, a lot of the times the people that are in these really significant positions are in their 20s. And I think a lot of those ones who were there for Harper have gone up through the ranks, and now they're in private sector jobs, and some are going to come out and come back, and there's going to be a new generation. So I think you're going to have a combination. You're going to have people that have the experience, like Jenny Byrne, I presume, would take some role in a Pierre Poilievre OLO. And if he wins in a Pierre Poilievre prime minister's office, probably. But you have also a new generation. And I think it's interesting to see where that's going to be drawn from, because remember, when you're in opposition, there are a lot fewer jobs available than when you're in government. When you're in government, you've got cabinet ministers' offices, you've got the prime minister's office, you've got donations flooding in. So the party has more capacity to hire. But when you're in 10 years of opposition, you don't have that. So you've got some MPs' offices, you've got an office around the leader. But your ability to draw in talent, I think, has to be a lot broader, and you have to cast a wider net. So I don't know where they're going to bring people from. And I think if you want to default to experience, there tends to be a revolving door between federal and provincial politics. So you'll get some people that were in Kenny's premier's office and Ford's premier's office and Moe's premier's office that'll then go up to Ottawa, and then eventually it changes and they all scatter again. But ideally, you'd bring in some new blood. Wherever that comes from, I don't know. But that would be, I think, the strongest sign that the new leader, whoever it is, could send.
We've seen in the States, even just a decade ago, where it was very much like Canada, the Republicans, insofar as they were very economically conservative, but on cultural stuff, on social issues, they were more quiet. They didn't really take that much of a stand. They were very divided in how they voted. And now, fast forward to present day, you virtually can't be a Republican without being pro-life. There are very few of them. They're even taking on the trans issue head on, cancel culture. Now we have a potential prime minister, and specifically a leader of the Conservative Party, who's very focused on economic issues, doesn't really touch the cultural issues, the social issues. What do you think needs to change in Canada for us to get to that level where we're a mainstream political party, conservative political party, can actually fight these issues head on? What do you think needs to happen?
It's an important question, and I don't know if I have the silver bullet of an answer, but I think the caution is that a lot of organized blocks don't always play well with other organized blocks. And in part, it's because they may not have any crossover. I mean, I look in Canada at the firearms community. I'm a gun owner. I've done a lot of work with gun laws and gun control in this country. It's a file I know well. A lot of the players on the firearms issues are single issue voters, or they have a small number of issues they care about, at the top of which is firearms. Pro-life voters, another group I know very well. They are oftentimes single-issue voters. They may have other things they care about, but the one that for them is the completely determining factor is abortion, euthanasia, life issues in general. Someone who is pro-gun and someone who is pro-life may cross over. They may not. I mean, these issues on the surface don't actually have to have anything to do with each other. And it's a challenge when you are a party that seems to have a lot more blocks within it than the opposition or the opposing parties do. The Liberals are not a block party. And when you're a party based around the idea of collectivism, it's very easy to build a coalition that doesn't involve individual blocks, because no one really has any individual identity in a significant way, with the exception of little outliers. So I think that's the challenge for conservatives, is that you have to have something to say to all of these groups and something to offer to all of them. And it's the balancing act, which has always been the thing that really screws over leaders that don't understand that balance, or when they do the complete pendulum from the leadership to the general election. And I think you need a leader that can speak to all of these people while still being authentic and true to themselves.
Yeah, the warring factions within the Conservative coalition in Canada, the Conservative political coalition within Canada is always very fascinating to me. And even within and I hope you're all right with me saying this, Alissa, but even within the pro-life movement within Canada, right? There are different organizations, there are different ideas of how to basically arrive at the same finish line, but it's different paths. I mean, that's a huge difference between our organization and an organization like Campaign Life Coalition. And I don't know if we necessarily see that quite as much in a place like the United States or the United Kingdom. But it does seem to me, you're right, Andrew, that here in Canada, especially within the federal, Conservative Party of Canada, you have these big blocks, and it really is a coalition in trying to keep it together. Now that you mentioned that, kind of the way to do that is to have a leader who is able and willing to do that. With the current people who are putting their names forward, whether it be, Leslyn Lewis or Jean Charest, Scott Aitchison, Pierre Poilievre, all of them. Do you see that potentiality exists more within the current slate of candidates for the leadership race? And I'd even apply that perhaps even to the leadership race we're seeing with the UCP provincially in Alberta. Do you see more of an opportunity of leaders being able to do that? Or do you think now that we've gone through this so many times, especially federally, that whoever the new leader is will understand that more, seeing what happened to Aaron O'Toole and seeing what happened to Jason Kenney? Or do you think that we might be repeating this again within the next couple of years?
This is where I'm very interested in hearing both of your perspective on a theory I have, if you'll indulge me, because
please, yes.
I'm pro-life, but I don't consider myself within the pro-life movement, certainly not to the extent that you are, because I don't have a group that is devoted to this issue entirely. And my observation, my read from the outside looking in, is that there are a lot of pro-life conservatives that are not single-issue pro-life voters. And a lot of these people are supporting Pierre Poilievre, even though Pierre Poilievre is offering pro-life voters effectively nothing. I think that presents a bit of a challenge, but I think it's also revealing that a lot of social conservative aligned voters seem to be looking at things a bit differently now. And when you bring up, Scott, the UCP leadership race, Danielle Smith, not at all a social conservative by any stretch, not religious, not pro-life, but her pitch has been, I would never jail pastors. I would never shut down a church. Jason Kenney, who is pro-life, did both of those things. So I do think this is part of why there's been a bit more of a social conservative libertarian alignment through COVID, because I think the most pressing issue for people of faith has not been abortion to a lot of people. It's been, hey, do I actually have religious freedom in this country anymore? But I think in a leadership context, that's changed things a little bit, because it's not only where the most electable or the most viable or supportable candidate is necessarily the most pro-life one anymore.
At the beginning of this federal leadership race, we sent out a survey to our supporters, asking them, if you're a member of the Conservative Party of Canada or plan on becoming a member, or let's say, you don't want to be a member, but pretend you're a member, how would you vote? How would you rank your ballot, especially in first place? And back then in early February, we had Pierre McKay's name on there, not Jean Charest, so how things change. But anyway, it was interesting because of the thousands of our supporters that answered that survey at the beginning of February, it was a 55-45, actually a 53-45 split for Leslyn versus Pierre. So like a very, very small lead for Leslyn versus Pierre. And then we asked that question again toward the end of May, beginning of June, sent it out to, the same people, to our supporters. Again, it's a survey, not a poll. So it's not necessarily scientific, but it's indicative. And at that point in time, Leslyn went from 53% to 85%, and Pierre went from 45% to below 15%. Now, I'm not saying that, Pierre's going to lose leadership because of that, or that every single member of the Conservative Party of Canada who is pro-life is going to vote that way. What I found to be interesting is that once some information was revealed, a lot of people kind of came home, so to speak, right? So you had a few debates in May where Pierre said, very strongly that he is pro-abortion and that he would do nothing for pro-lifers, as you said. I have heard from a number of people in different communities, not necessarily people who are within our database, say that they are voting for Pierre because of that freedom issue. I mean, I was speaking at a Dutch Reform community back in April, and they had organized a presentation for us, and we had a decent turnout, but it wasn't huge. And the organizer said, it's very, very disappointing because, back in February, we had people who took 3 weeks off of work to drive up to Ottawa. This was in Niagara. So drive up to Ottawa, 6 hours one way, 12 hours round, for 3 weeks straight to be there for the Freedom Convoy, which personally I have no problem with. I have no issue with. I had no issue with what the Freedom Convoy was trying to accomplish, in so much as to get rid of the COVID-19 restrictions that I think a lot of Canadians at that point in time thought weren't necessary any longer. However, he was saying it's very difficult and very frustrating because they were willing to take 3 weeks off of work to go do that, but they're not willing to take 90 minutes on a Tuesday evening to come to listen to how to get involved politically to reduce the number of abortions and assisted suicides in Canada. So I found that to be very interesting on how, if you have to, have a passport, a vaccine passport to travel, to go to a restaurant or whatever, people losing their jobs, then it's people are rightfully, pissed off, and they're going to do something about it. I have no problem with that. But when you're talking about, 300 babies a day that die from abortion, because it's not their babies or babies that they know of others, then all of a sudden it's not nearly as much of a priority. So I have noticed that, but at the same time, as information is revealed between the two different candidates, there has been a huge shift within the pro-life community. And I wonder if every pro-life member of the Conservative Party of Canada within right now, if we would be sitting a bit of a more close race. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Alissa, but I have noticed kind of a little bit what Andrew is saying. I don't know how much longer that will last for, given a lot of the COVID restrictions are gone and are being taken away. But I would love to know your thoughts on that, Alissa.
Well, I will say that just first and foremost, there were a number. I can't really say or give a percentage, but there were a number of SoCons that did give me personally, like our supporters that gave me personally a hard time, and just in general, people who were fighting against the mandates, who thought the mandates were just, who thought that everyone should be vaccinated. So it's not like all SoCons were automatically, against mandates and against vaccines. That being said, I think that a lot of them were, and there is quite a bit of crossover. And from my experience speaking to people, both friends and supporters, is that they can never go back to what happened. And so they are going to support the person who they think will ensure that never happens. And so I think because Pierre has name recognition, because his immediate video came out with, millions of views, he has a big database, he's very good at comms, they view him as the most electable person who will never go back. And so that's why they're supporting him to ensure his victory. It's certainly been a struggle, but I think we've definitely helped get Leslyn Lewis more support. And I think she's going to do a lot better than a lot of people think. It's constantly, Sheree versus Pierre. But I think that, she's traveling across the country, getting big crowds, was like one of the only, if not the only candidate who went up to the Northwest Territories and did presentations there. So, I think that temporarily, to a certain extent, not jailing pastors, not being imprisoned in your home, not being forced to inject yourself with something that you disagree with, whether it be ethically or morally or scientifically or medically, they can never go back to that. And so that's what's driving this particular leadership race in a way that we've never seen before.
Yeah. And I guess I think there's an alt, and I mean, I hate talking about it as though it's a fait accompli, because things can change. But if Pierre Poilievre wins the leadership race, people, I think, need to use ranked ballots to their advantage. And in the case of Leslyn Lewis, I mean, one notable example of this is how she was really sidelined by Aaron O'Toole after the 2021 election, despite all of these grand gestures about how she was going to play a strong role in the Conservative Party, and then she shoved to the back of the backbenches. And I think that it is important for people to vote with their conscience in leadership races and to send a message that, yeah, this is someone who resonates with a large part of the Conservative Party. And I think the best way Pierre Poilievre can appeal to social conservatives, if he wants to, and that's, I think, the big question mark, is by saying, yes, Leslyn Lewis, here's a prominent spot in the shadow cabinet for you. Doesn't need to be on the health file, but it can be on something to prove that you are a member of this team. We don't just want to shove you in the corner. And I think that'll be the thing to watch. And I do think that, I mean, Roman Baber is another example of this. Not a guy who's at all in any way pro-life, but he's making that similar pitch of, I believe that members have the right to represent their conscience, their constituents. And I think, yeah, if someone wants to reward him for that, even if you don't think he's going to win, put him higher than the candidate you like, who is, in your view, more electable.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of sending a message, this is something that I've asked a lot of guests about and that I grapple with, and that Scott and I talk all the time. And insofar as We have seen with Andrew Scheer and with Erin O'Toole, two people who are diametrically opposed on the life issue, Andrew being pro-life and Erin being staunchly pro-abortion, but having similar talking points, like, I will not reopen the abortion debate, this issue is settled. Despite the fact that, that polls have shown, recent polls, 2020 polls have shown that the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion in every province, including Atlantic Canada and Quebec. The majority of Conservatives, 62%, in caucus have voted pro-life on the past few abortion-related or life issue bills. Kathy Wagenthal's sex-selective abortion bill being one of them. The Conservative Party has adopted pro-life policies at convention, voted on by the grassroots. So why is there such a huge discrepancy between leadership in the Ottawa bubble and the
Rest
leader's
of the world?
office and the rest of Canadians, but especially the rest of the Conservative Party? Why can't they, what is holding them back from taking on these winnable positions?
I think you should take those polls that you've referred to and poll members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery, and you'll have your answer.
Exactly.
I mean, I hate the word gatekeeper now, I feel like has been claimed by Pierre Poilievre, but they are these intellectual gatekeepers that exist in the mainstream media and in media in general. And they're the ones that get to tell you where the Overton window is, what the acceptable opinions are. And the media has successfully made it so that a pro-life belief is outside the bounds of public debate and public discourse, so that if a politician is pro-life, that is inherently newsworthy and newsworthy not in a good sense, in a bad sense. And I think a big problem of that is with media, and that you have a small number of urban elites that go to journalism schools that then go and populate newsrooms, whether it's CBC or CTV or the Globe and Mail, that have never met an explicitly pro-life person in their lives and certainly are not themselves. And I think that's a big part of it. So it forces Canadians to feel that there's something abnormal about them if they share this view. And I think, to go back to the convoy for a moment, one of the real successes of the convoy was that all of these people that were told they were fringe realized that in numbers they actually have quite a significant group going, and they've got a significant gaggle of them that transcend the country and age and religion and political ideology. And I think the same is true of people who are pro-life, is that there is an orchestrated movement in this country that wants you to believe you are alone in your views so that you keep your mouth shut.
I actually disagree with Andrew on something, and we never disagree with our guests. So I want to get into this. So
I'm honored.
Just hold on. Yeah. I'm glad that you're honored. I think there has been a change in legacy media on the question specifically regarding abortion over the last, I would say, about a year or so. And it's not a huge change. I'm not saying there's going to continue to be this big change, but even that, I'm not going to call it an excuse or a crutch, but even that reasoning, I suppose, as to why the leadership leaders and leadership offices of Conservative parties in Canada, whether it be federal or provincial, are so distant from their base specifically on this question. So, I think of when it was leaked that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned about 6 weeks or so before the Dobbs decision happened at the end of June. They had an issue panel on CBC hosted by Rosemary Barton. And on that panel, you had someone like Althea Raj, who I don't know specifically her politics regarding this issue, and that I think we should know really the politics of most reporters on these issues, right? That's why we make them good reporters. And maybe she has made her politics known, I don't know. But I do remember her saying that on that panel on national, broadcast television, that it would make sense for the Conservative Party of Canada to adopt some sort of policy that most Canadians, don't believe that abortion should be legal all the way through to 9 months, like the Justin Trudeau Liberals would have you believe. You had someone like Chantal Hébert call Justin Trudeau and the current Liberal Party of Canada under him, because I don't think this applies to all Liberals, pro-abortion. Like, they're starting to kind of utilize our own talking points from right now, and they're legitimate questions, and they specifically spoke about R.V. Morgentaler versus Roe versus Wade, and how those two Supreme Court decisions in the two countries, being Canada and the United States, are so very, very, very different. How in Morgentaler, in that decision, you had 7 justices all say like there needs to be some sort of law that Parliament needs to come up with. It just can't be this law introduced in 1969 by the Pierre Trudeau government under the Liberals back then. So, I find, at least when we were being interviewed by certain reporters within legacy media, Catherine Levesque, I think, is one from the National Post, from Post Media, where they're very fair with us. Like they print what we say, they don't print it out of context, which I do not believe was the case all the way going back. Now, I know Alissa can back this up as well. That's not to say that our experience with legacy media, even, fairly recently, has all been, roses and gumdrops. There's been some difficulties, which I think, Andrew, that you've brought out that very much do exist. But I don't see them as this monolith that I did used to see them in that way 5 years ago. And so all this to say is that I think that reasoning that someone like, Andrew Scheer, Andrew O'Toole, Jason Kenney, Pierre Poliver have for why as to they would be so distant from the rest of Canadians and their conservative voter and donor bases is slowly starting to not exist anymore. Sorry, I just wanted to make that point.
And just a follow-up question, even if Andrew was correct in that there are gatekeepers in the legacy media and the parliamentary press gallery, why are the conservative leaders so afraid of them? Because those same people are going to attack them on a plethora of issues, not just social ones. On carbon tax, they're going to make it out to seem like they're anti-climate change, on guns, on everything. So why are they able to address these issues head on, but not able to address specifically the abortion one?
I think that's where you get into why Pierre Poilievre has resonated with people, because he's the closest we've had to a Ron DeSantis type in Canada who actually flips the script around and goes on offense instead of plays on the same sort of defensive, grovelly, apologetic ground that is really based on the idea that you have to apologize for being a conservative. And my theory on this has actually become that the media will criticize the Liberals. But when the media criticizes Liberals, it's about behavior. When the media criticizes conservatives, it's about belief. And fundamentally, the question is really, why are you not more like the Liberals? Why are you not? I mean, questions on climate change. When Aaron O'Toole comes out with a carbon tax, alienates his own supporters as a result of it, the media's question is, yeah, but why haven't you done more? And when the Liberals say, we're going to plant 2 billion trees, the Liberal criticism that they get from the media is not, why aren't you doing more? It's, well, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you fulfilling it? Because there does seem to be an alignment with the core philosophy of the Liberals, where they go afoul of the media when they lose their own way. Whereas with the conservatives, it's like even a conservative being an effective deliverer of their platform will be a problem to the media for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's time to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll have rapid fire questions with Andrew Lawton when we return. We'll be right back.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larossemedia.com
and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
And we're back with Andrew Lawton from True North Media. Once again, Andrew, thank you for joining us today on our podcast. Now, one thing that we like to do with our guests on this podcast before we let you go and go experience that freedom that you so lovingly wrote about in your latest book, which, by the way, #1 bestseller in Canada. But don't ask the CBC because they'll never tell you. We like to do rapid fire questions with our guests.
Rapid fire questions.
We're going to get into that right away here. And so our first question for you is, who was your best and worst interview?
Best interview, I'm going to say, was with I'm going to say William Shatner. William Shatner was a great interview. Lots of fun we had. And my worst interview was with the comedian Brent Butt from Corner Gas, who is
really
painfully unfunny when not reading a script. And it was like pulling teeth to get more than like a 2-word answer out of him.
That's funny because he used to be a guest on Jay and Dan's podcast, and I don't remember him being that bad. So
maybe he just didn't like me. That's entirely possible. Maybe I was just his worst interviewer.
Yeah. How did you meet your wife?
She interviewed me for a story. She's a journalist, and I was a contestant on MasterChef Canada, and she was writing a story, or was doing a story about me, and I believe violated journalistic ethics by going out on a date with me, but I have no regrets.
My husband and I love MasterChef Canada. It's on, or like MasterChef in general. It's on right now, and we're like diehards. We always watch it. Did you have a good experience with it?
It was entertaining. I mean, I like reality TV, so it was neat seeing behind the scenes and how like non-real it is. But I was eliminated in the first episode.
Okay.
This
isn't part of the rapid fire question, but I had no idea that you did that. So I guess I'm very, very curious. Like, what's the best dish? Like, what is your signature dish? Would you say personally?
If it's like a go-to whip it up comfort food dish, I'm going to go with chicken parm. Not extremely exotic, but absolutely delicious and not hard to make.
Yeah. Okay. And what if you have like a ton of time and like I'm coming over and you want to impress me?
So I'm actually on a bit of a smoker kick right now. So
yes, that's why I wanted to hear.
A smoker last or a Christmas and a half ago, and so I'm like pulled pork and ribs. I haven't done brisket yet. That's coming up next.
Well, you're not that far from me, Andrew. So we have to get together for a little smoke party. Anyway, so back to these questions. Our third question for you is, what do you think is the best Norm Macdonald joke?
Oh, best Norm Macdonald joke has to be do I identify it by the punchline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The youthful porpoise.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a little known one. That's a little known one. Yeah.
It's not a famous.
Yeah. I like Conan.
I like the University of Logic one.
That one's good as well. Yeah.
And then also there are many a joke that he did on his podcast. I don't know if you watched it, but at the end he'd force his guests to read the worst jokes, and some of them were the funniest. Like there was a Tom Green one about an airplane, but those are also pretty spectacular. Okay, which libertarian pickup line do you like better? 1, girl, you almost make me want to sign a government document confirming my eternal love for you. Almost. Number 2, taxation is theft. Want to make out? Or number 3, when I saw you, my heart experienced runaway inflation.
Oh, I'm going to go with taxation is theft. Always a winner.
Okay.
Would that one work on you, Andrew?
I mean, I'm married, so no.
Just
but
a shout
I might have
out.
been married more quickly if someone had tried it, perhaps.
There you go.
I stole those from a recent Babylon Bee article that made me laugh all the way through. So, yeah.
Okay, number 5. Who wore it better, Lord Christmas or Justin Trudeau?
Oh, got to be Justin Trudeau.
Oh yeah. And the fact that he keeps not changing it is just even more entertaining. Like it just gets worse.
Yeah, he's owning it. He doesn't want to accept that it might have been the problem.
Who thinks idea was it? Do you think it was Justin's idea, or do you think that was Sophie's idea?
I'm not commenting on this at all.
My favorite meme that I saw about his haircut was this is what happens when you freeze your barber's bank account.
Yes. I like that one.
Yeah. What is your ideal summer vacation?
So even though it is not normally what you do in the summer, I would take an overwater villa in the Maldives right now that has no internet access.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
So if we don't hear from you for like 3 days, we know exactly where you went.
And you won't be able to find me because I'm going to be like hiding away on my atoll without internet access. So good luck.
Okay. 7th question. What was the most interesting moment for you at the Freedom Convoy?
I think not having any idea what to expect and how many people were going to be there and what it was going to look like and feel like. And then you roll into downtown Ottawa and you just see people like from all over the country that are just there having a good time, coming up and like asking me to get to have a picture taken with them. It's just like, I'm a nobody. Why do you want a picture with me? But just seeing all of these like-minded people in one place after 2 years of it being like illegal to have more than 5 people in a room, I think it was just the grandiosity of it.
Were you able to sneak a dip into the hot tub there?
Or a bouncy castle?
I did not sneak dip into the hot tub. I also didn't get into the sauna, but maybe on the next convoy.
That's right.
And lastly, who is your favorite prime minister?
My favorite prime minister, I got to go with Sir John A, because I feel he needs some defense against the cancel mobs. But I will say, as someone who absolutely loves history, people take for granted that this country exists, and they forget how Confederation was really swimming against the current and swimming upstream. And this country would not exist if John A. Macdonald did not forge the political coalition to build this country and more importantly, to keep it together for those formative first few years.
So many good Sir John A stories. Like I just real quickly, like with Confederation and the fact that he basically got this barge and went up the St. Lawrence and picked up other like fathers of Confederation along the way and basically had a party barge and went into Charlottetown and more or less forced that agreement.
First convoy, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a Canadian history. People say it's boring compared to the Americans or the British or whatever. I like to say that Canadian history is basically one giant big business deal where we all get together, we all make a little bit of money, everyone has a little to contribute, everyone gets a little, and I don't know. I kind of like that. I like that concept of Canadian history.
Yeah, it's a good one. I may use that.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for coming on. Where can people find you? Where can people buy your book? Give a big shout out and promo yourself.
Well, you cannot buy my book in Indigo because they have, for inexplicable reasons, boycotted it from their shelves. But you can pick up the Freedom Convoy, the inside story of 3 Weeks That Shook the World on Amazon, or at SutherlandHouseBooks.com, which is directly from the publisher. And I am doing my show, and there's lots of other good stuff going on at tnc.news, which is where True North is headquartered. And I've got my Substack, which is andrewlawton.substack.com, and at Andrew Lawton on Twitter. Basically, if you just like type Andrew Lawton into any social media platform or publishing platform, I probably have an account there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It was a good discussion. Hopefully we can talk to you more in the future, and I can't wait to dive into your book.
Thank you so much.
Make sure you send us a picture of that brisket once you do it.
Okay, deal.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for coming on, Andrew.